Camera number 4. Bad prism, no hold down bracket on the cocking rack, that part's been fixed. Shutter is cocked but does not release. Flash contact is suspect, may be broken. Could be multiple issues with that shutter. Let's find out. As you can see, I'm just about ready to remove the front. I'm going to remove these front rings and see if things are sitting where I'd expect them to sit. Yes, they are. So there's no problem with the timing there. This piece we don't know about exactly because that was in the tension position, but whether it was 100% correct or whether it was a notch out, we won't know. And it doesn't really matter for our purposes. That's not our problem. So let's open up the front of this now. To get to the stage where you can remove the front, of course, you need to remove the chrome trims top and bottom and the leatherettes from the front. The leatherettes here are all in a very bad state. They've been exposed to something not particularly useful in the way of a adhesive, I think. Okay, so let's lift this off. It's sticking here with the adhesive. Whoever put the leatherettes on used an awful lot of adhesive. It's run down everywhere. Okay, so just looking in here at the body, I'm not seeing anything obviously untoward, and it did appear that this was all cocking correctly. I'll have a look at the front cam here. That's got all its teeth, so that's not our problem. The rear cam likewise appears to have all the teeth. That didn't appear to be any sort of problem anyway. Now the shutter, this would not release for us, but the mirror does release if encouraged. So, not a problem with the body as far as I can tell. I'm getting these washers off. They may have been glued into place. Some repairers struggled so much with them that they glued them in place so that they wouldn't fall in while they were putting things back together. Put the body to one side. There's cocking rack looks good, it's a Lectra type, all appears fine. Body to one side. Let's look at this shutter. It definitely appears to be in the cocked position, and it definitely does not release. I'll put some pressure on this rack. There's absolutely no response there. Let's try winding it up in case it's not quite advanced to the end of its stroke. All these flash wires are the wrong colours, and that one's in the wrong place. It would tend to catch on stuff. That's all the way up. So the shutter release does release, the arm here does move, but nothing's happening inside the shutter. And because nothing's happening inside the shutter, this isn't being released. And nothing winds down. Okay. I'll have to desolder that wire. Let's get this other stuff off first. It could be something as simple as a broken spring on the internal cocking ring in the shutter. The piece that rotates inside the shutter and starts the whole rundown of the mechanism. That cam did not look like it was in the right place. I'm not sure about that. Anyway, carry on. Is this the one I said that the flash contact might be dead? The flash contact is dead. One side of it's completely missing. The piece that would give this thing its downward tension and so block the action of that little rack there. So that switch is definitely shot. The whole contact is missing. There's no sign of it in here, so it could fall out. Struggle wriggling this off its post, sometimes more than others. Okay, I'll deal with that wire back shortly. Okay, dealt with that wire. These switches are a problem to deal with. They are brittle. They were probably brittle right from new. They're very hard to get your wires soldered to them without the plastic melting. And I may end up replacing this whole front panel rather than deal with that. Tip those screws out, and there's our shutter off the front. So I've got to make up my mind whether I want to rewire that or start with another one to replace it. Okay, so there's a little bit of corrosion here. And the shutter's doing nothing. It should be releasing. So yes, that little internal ring with the spring on it that hooks to the a post. Sometimes that breaks. If that breaks, when you release the shutter release, nothing actually happens, because that ring is what initiates the rundown cycle. Okay, well, this little ring's a different colour. I'm not used to seeing a bronze coloured one. It's okay, let's just get in here. Unhook that front retainer, take off. This is the shutter speed settings cam plate. Here's the latch that holds the shutter in the cocked position. This should have a spring on it that immediately moves. When this comes out, this thing should start moving. It's very reluctant to move. There is something seriously wrong here. Let's get that lock out. Get that out. The spring was not broken, it was present. Take out that main cam. We'll unhook this main spring. So the shutter's been cocked for a long time. Still got a lot of tension on that spring. That's a good one. This is a bit unusual. This speed train here is all jammed up. So that screw is a little bit loose. That wouldn't have helped. This is all very dirty in here. That's an unusual speed train, that one. It's there must have been a change of design at some stage. Normally this is just cut out at this point to access that screw. This one's just got a hole through the plate. You see it's all black. Normally it's a shiny train like that one, nickel plated. This is the self timer. That still works. Alright, this is our latch that unlocks the main cam. That spring just came off there, but that was in the right place previously. It's our moving flash contact. Oops. Don't be flicking pieces far and wide. Okay, what have we got here? I need the right pliers for this. You can all stop looking, I found them. Let's see if the blade actuating ring will move. Take the main cam off. All this is very sticky. Nothing's moving as freely as it should. Just take the B lever off. Recover its spring so I don't lose it. Well, you can move this, but it's very, very stiff. Right, with this patch of corrosion on the back, might be a hint that things are not as they should be. An odd place to get corrosion. Not sure how you go about getting moisture into a position like that. Well, that doesn't look like that's gone any further. Let's take this off. I'll remove this tiny spring before it runs away. And that blade actuating ring should move fairly freely. It's very stiff. Okay, let's have the shutter completely apart. See if there are any clues. The blades don't look bad. No problem here. The blades, they don't look too bad. Yeah, that was a bit sticky. But generally they look pretty good. What about the blade actuating ring now? Flip that out of the way. and that little latch. Now it's just stiff. That blade actuating ring's just very stiff in its movement. This whole plate, it's sort of got a funny silvery sheen to it. I think that's probably graphite that's been spread. It might suggest that it's been flood cleaned at some stage, and that's graphite that's run out from where it was doing its lubricating job. Everything here is sort of silvery grey. It's quite odd. And there's our blade actuating ring. Nothing to see really. Look at the colour of this thing. I'll see if it'll clean a bit. The graphite sort of embeds itself into that anodised finish. Often it doesn't come off completely, because that should be quite black, that part underneath that graphite. Well, you can see a lot's coming off there, but it still doesn't look black. Let's try something else. No, there's an awful lot of coming off, but it's still not coming back to the black finish that I would expect to see. That it should look much the same colour as that. You can see it looks much silvery. Very unusual. Right, well, I'll clean all these parts up, reassemble the shutter and see if it'll go. If you listen closely, you might hear this squeak. It shouldn't squeak. It means that this pin here, which acts against that detent spring, has too much friction. I'll put a little drop of a little spot of molybdenum paste on there. It may be that that spring is too tight or has been bent by someone too. That was it. That's where all that friction was. Friction of that spring on that little post on the blade actuating ring. Nice and smooth now, nice and free running. Just shows what a little bit of lubrication in the right place can do. Blades move absolutely smoothly now. You'd never know there was a problem. So, a bit of cleaning, a little spot of lube in exactly the right place, and the reassembly can start on the shutter. So at about this time I should be triumphantly demonstrating a good working retina reflex and telling you all about how I got that thing to go again, which should have been pretty straightforward because we were just replacing the odd broken piece, cleaning the shutter and sorting out the flash contacts. But it's fair to say things didn't go to plan, which is not uncommon with retina reflexes. So if you watch the action here, you'll see that as I press the release, that those blades close, but they don't close all the way. So there's an issue with that. It's an issue to do with timing. There's also another problem. The flash contact. You remember that the one we started with, which was this ugly beast here, had a broken flash contact here, and I thought that the easiest way around that would be to take a front from my parts bins and use that. And so I set to, I found a suitable front. I started transferring stuff from it, from the original to it, had all the pieces neatly put in place, and when I went to do up the screw that holds this arm in, I discovered that it was stripped out in the front plate. So as a result, the front plate was useless. So I thought, oh well, I'll have to get another one. So I got out another one, and that's this one here. And what's happened with this is that the flash contact, this thing here, has fractured. So now it's no longer providing the stop on this lever, and the flash obviously also wouldn't work. So I'm going to have to start again. So it means now I've got to sort through my pieces. I can probably find a good switch. This is, no, I can't just use this front, this is off a Reflex S. I can probably find a good switch on the stripped one with a stripped out screw hole and transfer that entirely into this front plate and hopefully sort out my timing issues at the same time. So life goes on. I've got to strip this thing back down. The body's all serviced, so there's no serious issues there to worry about, but I've got to remove this front, strip that shutter off that front plate and start building it back, or swapping the entire flash contacts over from one to the other. And I'll show you how I use a little blob of epoxy to strengthen that switch so it doesn't fall to pieces. So as you can see, I've recovered the switch from the one with the stripped out screw hole, and here is our original front plate with the rubbish switch, which I'm now going to transplant this into. So first I want to clean off the remains of this old adhesive on that wire and any that's in the channel that the wire has to sit into, so I can get this to sit neatly in place with no fights or arguments. And this little wire here has to be soldered to the flash contact here. That's the tricky bit. So I'll be to it. My 5-minute epoxy's gone walkabout, so I'm mixing some slow epoxy, which will slow the project down somewhat, but I've got all day. I'll just mix this up. And what I want to do is reinforce the switch. So this little hole here where you see the contacts, if I fill that up with araldite, epoxy, that will effectively lock those two contacts in, and they won't fall to bits. So that's what I'm looking for. And why I put the epoxy at this end rather than at this end of the switch is that if you put it at this end of the switch, you are effectively limiting the flexibility of that contact. And if you limit the flexibility of that contact, there's nothing surer than it'll fail fast. So by keeping my fixture to this end, where the contacts come through this plastic block, which is very, very fragile. Here's the broken one. This isn't even an original by the looks of it. This is somebody's homemade attempt. But it is very fragile. There's almost no plastic there at all. And they fracture. by stopping the wire from being able to move at this end basically means it'll be fine at the other end. It's not going anywhere. So that contact's all in place. I've got my chrome trim back on the front, my switch. I've cleaned all the adhesive off the front of that plate because it was pretty gunked up, as you may recall. Let's get rid of this aerolite before it falls on the table and causes me grief. And so this, once the adhesive is dried, I'll give it a final clean up and I can put the shutter back on the front. So camera number 4, that's back and running again. You'll notice that it's somewhat naked. All the leatherettes on this camera were fairly well destroyed from the choice of adhesive that had been used previously. Basically, whatever the adhesive was, the solvent in the adhesive had melted the leatherettes, and so that there are little patches on the leatherette where the whole pattern is just melted. Quite apart from the fact that there's a great build-up of adhesive on the back of the leatherettes, making them difficult to reuse. But anyway, let's review what we found with this camera. So, the flash contact. Now the flash contact was one of the major nuisances with this thing. And basically this is some sort of homemade flash contact. Oh, I'm sure that there's a lot of work has gone into this, but it didn't do the job. Basically the bottom contact here is supposed to come down and fairly low, and that's that the arm of the flash lever hits it. This is a new contact here. It should have looked like that. This piece here, this isn't long enough. It wasn't able to do that job. So it meant that the arm that allows the shutter to continue its actions wasn't blocking the action at all. It meant that the shutter would be quite erratic in its firing behaviour. The other problem with this shutter, of course, was just that in the shutter itself, nothing worked smoothly because the blade actuating ring was stiff, and it just didn't go. What else did we discover? Oh, the prism's desilvering. It's desilvering on the prism, so that prism really needs to be replaced, which is another reason I haven't bothered to finish this camera off. So this business of the flash contact, I mean, I started with a replacement front panel. I discovered that the screw hole here was stripped, so I had to move to using another one. I used it, and the flash contact, it should look like that. Sit the other way up. Yeah, it should sit in there like that. It broke. It didn't break immediately. It broke after I'd used the mechanism about 20 or 30 times firing the shutter. I've since potted that back up with aerolite. This can be used on another camera. But that was very annoying. So I went back to the original front panel and transferred in the flash contacts from the one that was stripped out. So yes, I went right through my parts to achieve that. So yes, it was a bit of a nuisance, this one. What was its original problem? Well, certainly someone had been in there servicing it, and that was when this flash contact was changed for one that couldn't possibly do the job properly. The leatherettes had all been glued back with an inappropriate adhesive, so the leatherettes were all effectively ruined. They'd never looked like anything useful. And because they'd done this, that shutter would never have worked properly, even if it had been serviced correctly. It hadn't been serviced correctly. It hadn't been lubricated correctly. There was a lot of graphite around the place. It looked like it had been flood cleaned or flooded with perhaps graphite and solvent, but it wasn't in the right place. and certainly it wasn't lubricating that blade actuating ring correctly. So the shutter wasn't going to go. They made certain it wasn't going to work effectively by not replacing that with an original contact, and then they ruined the Leatherettes into the bargain. So yeah, a few mishaps with this camera. As I say, the prism, there's desilvering on the prism. It's not one I'd be anything like ideal to use, but it could be used. I mean, it doesn't really affect your images at all on the film, of course, and it doesn't have a terrible effect even on the viewing image in the finder. But it's distracting. You'd certainly want to replace the prism. But if you replace the prism, replace the Leatherettes, and found a working meter, it would be a good camera. So anyway, that's the story for camera number 4. And I'm glad that little saga's over.